On the night of our 10th wedding anniversary, my husband handed me a glass of wine, looked me in the eyes, and told me he wanted a divorce. I smiled. I said okay, and then I told him he could have the kids. He thought he'd broken me. He had no idea I'd been waiting 2 years for exactly this moment. My name is not important. What matters is this. I was 32 years old, living in a semi-detached in Oakville, Ontario, with a husband who hadn't touched me in 18 months and 2 kids who deserved better than what our house had quietly become. My daughter was 7, my son was 5. I spent my days driving them to school, packing lunches, managing the household budget in a spreadsheet I'd built myself, and pretending not to notice the second phone my husband kept in his gym bag. His name is Marcus. I'll call him that because that's his name and I'm done protecting him. We met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's cottage up near Muskoka. He was charming in the way that some men are charming before you know them well enough. Easy laugh, good with a crowd, the kind of person who makes you feel like the most important person in the room. I was working as a junior analyst at a financial services firm downtown. He was in commercial real estate. On paper, we made sense. In practice, we made a family, and then he made other plans. I left my job when our daughter was born. It made sense at the time. His income was strong, the daycare waitlists in our area were brutal, and I told myself it would be temporary. Temporary became a year. Then 2. Then I was pregnant again, and the conversation never quite happened. By the time our son started JK, I had been out of the workforce for 5 years, and the woman I used to be, the one with her own RRSP contributions and her own professional network and her own reason to get dressed in the morning, felt like someone I'd read about somewhere. I want to be honest about this part because I think a lot of women skip over it. The slide into invisibility is not dramatic. Nobody takes anything from you all at once. It happens in small accommodations, in reasonable compromises, in the slow accumulation of years where you keep meaning to go back to work and something always comes up. Marcus didn't ask me to disappear. He just stopped noticing that I was there. The first sign was a Thursday evening about 2.5 years before our anniversary dinner. I was folding laundry in our bedroom when I heard him in the kitchen talking on the phone in a low voice, not whispering. Whispering would have been obvious, just low, careful, a register he never used with me or the kids. I stood in the hallway for a moment and listened. I couldn't make out words, just tone. Warm, private, like he was holding something cupped in his hands. I put down the shirt I was folding. I walked to the kitchen doorway. He saw me, and his body did a small, almost imperceptible thing. A shift, a micro-adjustment, and then he said into the phone, "I'll call you back," and hung up. "Who was that?" I asked. "Guy from the Brampton file," he said, and he picked up his water glass and walked past me to the living room. I didn't push. That night I lay in the dark and thought about all the reasons a person might take a phone call in a low voice, and I talked myself into every one of them. Work stress, a sensitive deal, a surprise he was planning. I was good at that, talking myself into reasonable explanations. I'd had a lot of practice. But something had shifted. A small cold thing had settled in my chest, and it didn't go away. Over the following months, I paid attention in a way I hadn't before. The late returns from the office that didn't match the calendar he kept on his phone. The weekend client meetings that left him in a better mood than he'd been in at home in years. The way he'd started going to the gym before work when he'd never been a morning person in his life. I wasn't spying. I was just paying attention finally to what had been in front of me. By that winter I knew. I didn't have proof. I didn't have a name. But I knew the way you know things in your body before your mind has finished working it out. The night I finally found the confirmation I didn't want to find, I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a very long time. His second phone, which he'd left charging behind a stack of towels in the linen closet, I'm not sure what made me look there, instinct, probably, had a screen full of messages from a contact saved as R. Simmons. which I'm fairly certain was not her real name or was at least her professional name because the content of those messages had absolutely nothing professional about it. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. I washed my face. I went back to bed. I did not cry that night. I'd like to say it was because I was already formulating my plan, but honestly, I think I was just in shock. The crying came later, over many nights, in the shower where the sound was covered or in my car in the school parking lot with 10 minutes to spare before pickup. Grief doesn't have a schedule, it finds the gaps. But somewhere in those months, I couldn't tell you exactly when, the grief started to share space with something else. Something quieter and more purposeful. I started thinking clearly about my situation, not emotionally but practically, the way my father had always taught me to think about problems. My father spent 30 years as an accountant for a manufacturing company in Hamilton, and his whole approach to life was, understand the numbers, understand your position, and then decide what to do. I understood my position: no income, no recent employment history, 2 young children, a mortgage in both our names on a house that had appreciated significantly, an RRSP that hadn't been touched in 6 years because we'd moved everything to his spousal RRSP for the tax advantage. On paper, I had almost nothing of my own. So I started building. I enrolled in a bookkeeping certification program through an online college, the kind that's self-paced and doesn't require you to explain to anyone why you're suddenly studying at midnight. I did the modules after the kids were in bed, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me. Marcus was in his office, or said he was. I didn't check anymore. I had other things to do. I opened a savings account at a different bank. Not secret exactly, nothing illegal, just separate. From the household budget, which I managed entirely, I began setting aside small amounts. $50 here, $80 there. Money I'd saved on groceries by switching to the No Frills on the other side of town instead of the Loblaws near our house. Money from the monthly household allowance that Marcus never tracked because he trusted me completely, which I found in those months almost funny. I also called the family lawyer. Her office was on a side street in Burlington, and I found her through the Law Society referral service. I told her my situation in a single phone call, calmly and factually, and she told me what I needed to know. In Ontario, the matrimonial home is treated differently from other assets. Both spouses have an equal right to possession regardless of whose name is on the title. The equalization process under the Family Law Act would account for the increase in value of all family property during the marriage. My years as a primary caregiver and homemaker would be considered. Spousal support could be claimed. Child support followed the federal child support guidelines and was not optional. She also told me something I hadn't expected. She said, document everything. Not because I would necessarily need it, but because information is leverage, and leverage protects you. I started documenting. By the time our 10th anniversary arrived, an October evening with the maples along our street gone full red and gold, I was 8 months into my certification program, had passed all but the final module, had approximately $9,000 in my separate account, and had been in contact with my lawyer 4 times. I had also, quietly, been in touch with a former colleague from my analyst days who told me there was a contract bookkeeping position opening up at her firm in the new year and that she'd be glad to put my name forward. Marcus made a reservation at a restaurant in downtown Oakville, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list the size of a magazine. My mother came to watch the kids. I wore the green dress I'd bought for a friend's wedding 3 years ago and had not worn since. Marcus told me I looked nice. I said thank you. Over dinner, he ordered a bottle of Niagara Pinot Noir and talked about a development project he was working on in Mississauga. I listened. I asked questions. I ate my halibut, and I thought about my daughter's face that morning when she'd helped me pick out my earrings. I thought about my son's habit of narrating his own activities in third person, and now he's putting on his boots, and now he's going down the stairs, which had been making me laugh for a year. When the dessert menus arrived, Marcus set his down and looked at me in a way that was different from how he'd looked at me all evening. Settled. Decided. like a man who had rehearsed something. I need to talk to you about something, he said. I put my hands in my lap. I think we should separate, he said. Properly. I think we should start the process. He had a lot more prepared. I could see it behind his eyes, the careful language, the reassurances, the version of this that he'd been practicing. But I didn't let him get to any of it. Okay, I said. He blinked. Okay? Yes. Okay, I think you're right. The rehearsed speech had no answer for that. He sat back slightly. I've had a family lawyer draw up some initial terms. Just as a starting point, nothing set in stone. You can send them to my lawyer, I said. A pause. You have a lawyer? I do, I said. We can handle everything through them. That's probably cleanest. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. The Pinot Noir was very good. I thought about the fact that he had probably spent 3 times what I would have spent on a bottle, and that within a few months that would no longer be any of my concern. Are you, he started, you're not surprised. It wasn't quite a question. I decided to be honest. I've known for almost 2 years, I said. I just needed to be ready before we had this conversation. The color changed in his face. Not guilt, exactly. I'd stopped waiting for guilt. Something more like the specific discomfort of a person who has been outpositioned. He'd thought he was holding all the cards. He'd thought he was the one who'd been preparing. He had no idea. We finished dinner. We were both very polite. I think the couple at the next table thought we were 2 colleagues having a business meal. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's lawyer sent over an initial proposal. It was not generous. The language around the matrimonial home suggested we should list it immediately and split the proceeds after the mortgage and selling costs. Spousal support was offered as a lump sum, a number that, while not nothing, was significantly below what the guidelines would suggest for a 10-year marriage where one spouse had left a career to manage the household and raise children. The proposal on child arrangements assumes the children would live primarily with him given his stable income and professional schedule. I read that phrase twice. I sent everything to my lawyer. She called me the same afternoon. This is a negotiating position, she said, not a settlement. They're starting low on support, and they're characterizing the child arrangement in a way that doesn't reflect the actual parenting history. We can address all of this. I also want you to look at something else, I said, and I sent her the screenshot I'd taken some months earlier of a bank transfer notice I'd found in a shared email account we used for household bills. A transfer of $40,000 from a joint line of credit to an account I didn't recognize. I'd traced the account, with some careful searching, to a numbered company. When I'd looked up that company in the Ontario Business Registry, the registered director was a name I recognized. A woman I'd eventually connected, through some patient cross-referencing, to the person in his phone. My lawyer was quiet for a moment. When did this transfer happen? She asked. 14 months ago, I said. Were there others? 2 more, smaller, 22,000 and 11,000, all to the same account. Another pause. I'm going to need you to send me everything you have. I sent her everything. The screenshots, the registry search, the timeline I'd built in a spreadsheet because I am, after all, my father's daughter. The negotiation that followed was not pleasant, but it was relatively brief. When Marcus's lawyer saw our counterproposal, which included the equalization claim, the spousal support calculation, a request for full financial disclosure on the transfers, and our position on primary residence for the children, the tone of the correspondence changed considerably. Marcus called me himself one evening, which was a departure from the lawyer-only communication we'd agreed on. You can't think you're going to take the kids, he said. His voice was controlled but only just. I'm not taking them anywhere, I said. I'm asking that the parenting arrangement reflect the reality of how they've been raised, which is primarily by me, which any family court in this province would recognize. This isn't, he stopped. This is not how I wanted this to go. I know, I said. You wanted me to sign whatever your lawyer sent over and be grateful. That's not how it's going to go. There was a long silence. The transfers, he said finally. You're going to claim those as dissipation of family property. My lawyer is going to make the argument, yes, I said. Unless there's a voluntary disclosure and an adjustment in the settlement that accounts for the amount. That's cleaner for everyone. He didn't respond. I heard him breathing. Marcus, I said, and I kept my voice level because I had promised myself I would keep my voice level. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I spent 10 years building a life in that house and I'm not going to leave it with less than I'm entitled to. I have 2 kids who need stability and a mother who can actually provide for them. That's what I'm asking for. He said he needed to talk to his lawyer. I said that was fine. The final agreement was reached 6 weeks later. We are selling the matrimonial home and splitting the net proceeds equally. I am receiving spousal support for 4 years, calculated at a rate consistent with the guidelines for a marriage of this length and the income disparity at the time of separation. The $73,000 in family funds that were transferred to the numbered company are being treated as an advance on Marcus's equalization payment, which means my equalization entitlement is reduced by half that amount and his is reduced by the other half, which, in practical terms, means he owes me significantly more than he would have otherwise. He also pays child support in accordance with the federal child support guidelines, based on his income, which is not small. The children live with me. Marcus has them every second weekend and 1 weekday evening per week, and we communicate through a co-parenting app because I find it easier to keep things factual that way. I started the contract bookkeeping position in January. It's 3 days a week, which works with the kids' school schedule. My colleague who referred me has become a genuine friend. My manager is a woman in her late 40s who found out about my situation a few weeks in and said, without any pity in her voice, "Good. Now let's make sure you're building your own pension this time." I liked her immediately. We moved into a rental townhouse in a neighborhood I'd always liked, closer to my parents, good schools, a park the kids can walk to on their own. My son decided within the first week that the park needed to be inspected on a daily basis, just to be sure. My daughter has started writing a journal. She keeps it under her mattress, which I know because she told me. She said she wanted a private place to put her thoughts. I told her that was a very good idea. There are nights that are hard. I won't pretend otherwise. The first time my kids went to their father's for the weekend and the house was quiet in that particular way. Not peaceful, just empty. I sat at the kitchen table and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in years. Not for Marcus. For the version of the future I thought I was building when I was 26 and full of certainty about how things would go. But I know something now that I didn't know when I was standing in that hallway listening to my husband's careful, low voice on the phone. I know that the version of security I'd been counting on was not real. It was borrowed, and borrowed security is the most expensive kind, because when it's called in, you have nothing left of your own. What I have now is mine. It's smaller and plainer, and I built it in stolen hours after the kids were asleep, but it belongs entirely to me. The money in my account, the certification on my wall, the job that I show up to 3 days a week, mine. The townhouse with the kids' drawings stuck to the fridge, and my son's boots always in the wrong place by the door, and my daughter's journal under her mattress, mine. Last week, my father came for dinner. I made the roast chicken I've been making since I was a teenager, learning beside him in his small kitchen in Hamilton. After the kids went to bed, we sat at the table with our tea, and he looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. "You did this the right way," he said finally. "I had a good teacher," I said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. A woman's security doesn't come from the person she married. It comes from knowing with absolute certainty that she can stand on her own ground. I lost 10 years learning that lesson. I'm spending the rest of my life making use of it. I think about my father a lot these days. The way he'd sit at the kitchen table in Hamilton with a cup of instant coffee and a notepad, working through whatever problem needed solving. He never dramatized anything. He just looked at the numbers, figured out where he stood, and decided what to do next. I used to think that was a cold way to live. Now, I think it was the most loving thing he ever taught me. What happened in my marriage was not complicated when I finally let myself see it clearly. Marcus made choices, and those choices had consequences, not because the universe was punishing him, but because that is simply how cause and effect works between people. When you quietly drain the trust from a relationship over years, when you move money you don't have the right to move and tell yourself you'll sort it out later, when you underestimate the person sleeping across the hall from you, those things come back, not as fate, just as reality arriving on its own schedule. I made choices too. The years I spent not asking hard questions, not protecting myself, not treating my own financial future as something that deserved attention. Those had consequences as well. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I say it because it's true and because the moment I accepted it was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like someone with actual agency. That shift was everything. What I had to grow was honesty first, with myself, about what was actually happening, about what I actually needed, about what kind of life I wanted my kids to grow up watching me live. That kind of honesty is harder than it sounds. It asks you to see things you'd rather not see and sit with them anyway. I sat with them for almost 2 years in the dark while everyone around me saw a tidy family and a nice house. The second thing I had to grow was my mind. Not because I'm particularly clever, but because I had to be deliberate. I had to learn things I didn't know, rebuild skills that had gone unused, understand laws and processes and paperwork that nobody had ever explained to me. Nobody handed me a roadmap. I found one, piece by piece, because I had no other option. My father taught me that problems respond to careful thinking. He was right. And then there was the part that doesn't get talked about enough. The part where you actually have to keep going on the days when it's incredibly hard. Studying at midnight when you're exhausted. Setting aside $50 when every instinct says it's pointless. Making one more call to a lawyer you're not sure you can afford. Showing up again and again to a future that doesn't exist yet. That kind of persistence is quiet and unglamorous, and it is, I think, the thing that made everything else possible. My daughter keeps her journal under her mattress. My son inspects the park daily just to be sure. I make roast chicken on Sundays and my father comes for dinner sometimes and we sit at the table and don't need to say very much. This is what I built, in the hours no one was watching. It isn't perfect, but it is entirely, completely mine.